Everything changes in an instant, like a hurricane that leaves no chance for escape. When Walter White learned of his diagnosis, his life seemed to fall apart. But what if he hadn't chosen the path that became his curse? What if he didn't start cooking meth? Imagine if Walter White had become a criminal, instead of turning to the dark side. What if he had made a different choice? How would his fate have changed? But what if he changed the course of events? What if he didn't choose the dark path? Perhaps his life could have gone down a completely different, unexpected road. Every glance at these bills reminds Walter White how quickly his life could come to an end. He sits in the dark garage, a nearly empty table in front of him, and in his mind, only two questions are swirling: how to survive the coming months, and how to protect his family from the financial consequences. Bitterness from his helplessness overwhelms him. He remembers how, years ago, he was at the peak of his scientific career. All those years, his life was filled with hope for success, and now, his skills, his knowledge, his experience all seem useless. But in this moment, he makes a decision. Instead of seeking out the dark path, he chooses to return to science, to the field that once brought him joy. But there's one problem. The laboratory he once knew no longer exists. He decides to reach out to his former colleagues, Elliot and Gretchen. They've long moved on to the big business world, but Walter White hopes they might offer him a solution. He calls them, but doubts linger in his mind. Will he be ready to accept their help? In this moment, he realizes, no matter which path he chooses, he can't turn back. Every action from now on is tied to consequences that will change not only his life but also the lives of his family. His decision to seek help from his former colleagues is not just a step toward survival. It's a choice that will open doors he never thought he would open. But Elliot and Gretchen, people who have long moved on to the world of big business, find the idea of returning to science, even at the request of an old friend, not only strange but dangerous. In their eyes, Walter White is now just a shadow of the scientist he once was. When Walter gathers the strength to dial the number, his heart races faster than he expected. He knows this call could be a turning point. Will he be able to restore their faith in his idea, or will they see him as a helpless old man, unable to find his way in this new world? Walter's words come out calmly, but there's a trace of anxiety in his voice. He tells Elliot that he needs help just for survival, but for the advancement of science. Elliot listens carefully, but his reaction is silent. He realizes that returning to the lab is not just a step back into science. It's a step into the unknown. Time waits for no one. Walter White prepares for the next phase. He's returning to a world that once was familiar to him, and this time, he's determined to be ready. But the world has changed, and now his knowledge may not be enough to deal with the problems he's created for himself. Every movement, every touch of the old equipment is a step back into his past. Walter feels his confidence begin to return. He reminds himself that this was once a part of his life, a part of who he was. But time doesn't stand still, and the old equipment now feels foreign to him. He realizes, in order to return to science, he needs more than just memories. He opens the laptop, but the results on the screen are what he expected. The scientific calculations don't add up. The chemical equations don't work the way they should. He feels his old knowledge starting to betray him. What he once knew now seems outdated, like the entire world around him. But Walter doesn't give up. He decides, if the old knowledge doesn't work, then he must learn something new. He grabs the books that are relevant now, new materials that open doors to the unknown. This will not just be a return to science, it will be his new beginning. Reading, new ideas, new theories become his guiding light. He is consumed by the scientific world, as if he is once again a young scientist, ready for new discoveries. But with each new revelation, he understands, this world is no longer the one he knew. To find a solution, he must not just reclaim his scientific glory. He needs to create something new that will change everything. Days have passed, and Walter now looks different. He's no longer the man bound by old methods. He lives for a new purpose, his eyes burning with determination. The formulas on the board grow more complex, and his experiments become riskier. Walter isn't just trying to revive his career. He's looking for something greater, a solution that will not only help him but change the world. His eyes burn with determination, but there's growing concern behind them. He knows his path is not just about a scientific discovery. It's a gamble, scientific progress or disaster. Everything he does now feels like a ritual. He understands every action has meaning. Every chemical connection, every decision in this moment will shape his future. He is no longer afraid of mistakes. He realizes, here, in his makeshift lab, he can change everything. And then, the moment of truth. The mixture begins to glow, and in Water's eyes, there's not only fear but awe. He realizes he's on the verge of a scientific breakthrough, but also understands the immense responsibility that comes with it. What has he created, and how will he live with the consequences? He's made his decision. Water understands his discovery could change everything. He is no longer the man who fears the consequences. He's ready, but there's one problem. His scientific progress may face a world that isn't ready to accept it. He's on his way to the conference, where he will present his discovery. He knows his project will spark a storm of emotions. Some will be in awe, others will fear it, but one thing he knows for sure, the world will change. The conference begins. Water stands before an audience of scientists and critics. He's not afraid, but he understands the outcome of his discovery will depend on the reaction of those who are listening to him now. And these people, they're not just scientists. They are the ones who can either crush his dreams or make him a genius. He finishes his speech, and silence fills the room. The scientist's gazes are filled with doubt, but also curiosity. But Walter White is no longer afraid of opinions. He's laid out his theory, and know it will either elevate him to a pedestal or destroy him. He knows he's on the edge of the greatest discovery, or the most catastrophic failure. Leaving the room, Water feels the gaze of his peers upon him. It's not just respect, it's fear. They ask questions about the consequences of his discovery. But Water, despite their fear, feels a growing confidence. He knows his discovery is more than just a scientific achievement. It's a path to a new world. Later that evening, Water meets with Gretchen and Elliot at a cafe. Gretchen, as always, is concerned. She can't understand what drives him to go down this path. Elliot, on the other hand, is more interested in how his discoveries could be applied in real life. He doesn't see a scientific threat, but he knows Walter is on the brink of becoming a man who others will fear. In his lab, silence reigns once again. Walter is absorbed in the new data, but he feels it. His discoveries are starting to exceed what he once imagined. This is not just scientific progress, it's something greater. He begins to realize that his work could impact the world, but he doesn't yet understand how. But then a message, the expected email with the results of further research, meant to confirm his theories. But instead, troubling news. An anomaly in the experiment has led to a dangerous reaction. He realizes something has gone wrong. Now Walter is no longer just a scientist, he's a man who must urgently fix his mistake. He can't let his discoveries lead to something far worse. But every new action, every new measurement only worsens the problem. He realizes his research has gone beyond his control. Walter understands the experiment is spiraling out of control. He tries to stabilize the data, but it's futile. Every new step brings him closer to disaster. He feels the space around him closing in. The lab, where he once created wonders, is now becoming his prison, and if he doesn't stop now, the consequences could be catastrophic. He steps away from the instruments. His breathing becomes heavy. Fear takes over. He feels like he's losing control. His knowledge no longer provides him comfort. Everything he once knew about chemistry no longer matters. He has become a slave to his experiment. And then, like a lightning strike, the realization hits. He understands the only way to save the situation is to ask for help. But who can he trust? He had decided to go it alone. Now, his pride is his greatest enemy. He dials the number and his voice trembles with tension. Hank, as always, was ready for any call, but this one caught him off guard. He hears something new in Water's voice, and it just fear, but real danger. Hank, though trying to hide it, understands something incredibly important and dangerous has happened. Water begins to explain what happened. Each word is hard for him to say, but he knows he can't keep it to himself any longer. This is no longer just a scientific experiment. This is a matter of life and death. Hank listens, but in his eyes, there's more than just concern. He realizes this could be dangerous not just for Water, but for everyone. Hank arrives at the lab. He examines the equipment and chemicals, trying to understand what went wrong. But the more he investigates, the more he realizes that what he's dealing with goes beyond his comprehension. He sees that the experiment has become uncontrollable, and even more frightening, knows they can't turn back now. Tension builds between Water and Hank. They know time is running out. Every move could be fatal. Water is ready to face whatever happens. But Hank, despite his determination, can't ignore the fear for his life and the safety of everyone around him. Hank listens carefully, but his gaze becomes filled with doubt. Water explains his theoretical calculations, but Hank feels that these are just words trying to cover up what's really happening. More and more, He begins to realize that Walter's experiment is spiraling out of control, and that in his pursuit of discovery, he's forgotten about safety. The argument between them intensifies. Walter tries to convince Hank that everything can still be saved, but Hank finally decides to take control of the situation. He realizes that Walter can no longer control what he's created, and he takes matters into his own hands. This decision could be fatal, but Hank sees no other option. Despite Walter White's protests, Hank Schrader decides to shut down the equipment that's leading to catastrophic consequences. He turns off the main server, but as he does, the lab is filled with a blinding light. Hank Schrader instinctively jumps back, and the air is thick with dread. Their attempts to stop the process may have only triggered something far more dangerous. The lab descends into complete chaos. The lights flicker, screens flicker, and all the equipment makes strange noises. Walter White and Hank Schrader stand amidst this apocalypse, trying to figure out what went wrong. But suddenly, they hear a distant rumble. Something is happening, and it's much more than just a malfunction. Gretchen Green stands in the hallway, her face twisted with horror. She realizes that Walter White's experiment has become a threat not only to him but to everyone around him. She dials a number, but her voice trembles. She knows it may already be too late. The darkness engulfs the lab, and they find themselves alone. Walter White and Hank Schrader realize that they can no longer control what they've created. Everything they've unleashed now has a life of its own. This is no mere mistake, it's an unimaginable catastrophe, the consequences of which are impossible to predict. The laboratory sinks into deep silence, with distant, thunder-like crashes echoing, a harbinger of impending doom. Walter White and Hank Schrader stand amidst the ruins, knowing they can no longer control the situation. All the chemical reactions they tried to steer have turned into chaos, and now they can't stop the catastrophe. Gretchen Green sits in her office, her face twisted with guilt and concern. She knows she can't stop Walter White, but maybe she can convince Jesse Pinkman to intervene. She dials his number, hoping against hope that it can still prevent the tragedy. Jesse Pinkman sits in his home, receiving the call from Gretchen Green. His face is filled with doubt and concern. He knows intervening could be dangerous, but he's ready to help. He can't forget what happened between him and Walter White. But right now, it's about saving people. Hank Schrader, realizing the situation is beyond his control, decides to take action. He raises his weapon, pointing it at the equipment, still emitting flashes of light and waves of energy. He knows that if it doesn't stop the process now, the consequences could be catastrophic. Everything they've created is now spiraling out of control. Walter White's experiment is destroying the lab, the walls cracking, and equipment shattering. Walter White and Hank Schrader run for their lives, knowing that their attempts to prevent the catastrophe have failed. The lab is destroyed. Everything they built is now reduced to rubble. But in the distance, there's one final, deafening rumble, and then silence, the moment before they realize that the catastrophe is far from over. In the empty lab, amidst the rubble and flames, a dark figure emerges from the smoke. It's Jesse Pinkman. He's been standing in the shadows, watching his world collapse, and now, standing here, he realizes that there's no easy way out. He sees that everything Walter White worked for has been destroyed, and now, what to do with it else is a question he can't seem to answer. Jesse Pinkman, standing alone in the center of the ruined lab, feels a rage building up inside him. He knows that if he hadn't let Walter White manipulate him, maybe things would have turned out differently. But now, his inner voice forces him to realize he must take responsibility. This isn't just a catastrophe, the result of his own choices. Meanwhile, Walter White stands amidst the ashes and ruins, finally beginning to realize the consequences of his actions. His face is twisted with a mix of regret and disbelief. He still tries to justify his choices, just as he once justified them to himself. But with every step, he understands more and more that this cannot be fixed. At some point, Walter White decides they need to leave the lab. He heads toward the exit, but then his eyes fall on one strange detail. A door, which he'd always seen locked, is now wide open. At that moment, he realizes that the catastrophe might only be the beginning. Walter White and Hank Schrader approach the open door. In the hallway, stretching into the darkness, something lurks. Walter feels his heart race, realizing that what awaits them behind this door may be far worse than anything they've encountered in the lab. Beyond the door lies another lab, but this time, everything is different. The equipment in this new space is far more advanced and dangerous. On the screen, the logo of an unknown corporation appears, and both men realize this is no mere mistake. This is the beginning of a new, Even more perilous game. White and Hank Schrader stand before a new evil, unsure of what lies ahead. They realize that what they just endured was merely a small chapter in a much larger, far more dangerous story. A story where they can no longer control the situation. The game is starting, but with new rules. The mysterious door is now open, and before White and Hank Schrader lies something beyond their wildest imaginations. A laboratory unlike anything they've ever encountered, filled with technologies they couldn't have dreamed of. The battle with their past may only be the beginning of something far more destructive. The only question left is, what lies behind that door? What secrets lurk in the dark hallways? And who is truly behind this new evil? What they find behind this door will mark the beginning of an even more dangerous game. The continuation of this journey and the secrets they will uncover. In the next video, subscribe to not miss the continuation, where we'll uncover new mysteries and secrets that Walter and Hank will have to face.